Welcome. Welcome to Visuality, a pilot's best friend. Hi, my name is Gwendolyn Galsworth, and I'm founder and president of Visual Thinking, Inc., the Visuality Institute, and Visual Thinking Europe. We specialize in the technologies of the visual workplace, including visual management and other categories of visual thinking. Please visit our website for my books, videos, podcasts, everything, articles, services, products. Love to see you there. And I'm delighted to say that I'll be joined today by Dr. Phil Hayden, who is qualified in every possible way to walk us through flying in visuality. He has a doctorate in environmental engineering. He was the head of numberless environmental engineering projects all over the world. And for 5 years, he was an Air Force flight instructor, 5 exciting years. Here he is in his Piper Arrow, and here he is with his lovely, brilliant wife, Carol Shaw, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Engineering at the University of Dayton, and founder and director of UD's Center for Competitive Change during its long and successful life. So we will begin by my giving a short introduction to the story of flight from the point of view of some hidden aspects that may surprise you the way they surprised me, that will bring us into the discussion of visuality. Okay, so let the story begin. The partnership between visuality and pilots did not start in the air, nor in preparation for the air. It started on the ground with the U.S. mail. Let's see what I mean. It was, in fact, the Pony Express, that icon of the Wild, Wild West, established in 1860, that was the first way that mail traveled the distance across our country. 10 days, huge difference from east to west, from west to east, 80 riders, 400 horses, 184 way station. We're talking about one trip and hundreds of support personnel all along the way. And as a point of comparison, it cost $5 to send one envelope. That was 250 times the rate of normal mail, local mail. However, even with that amount of money, the Pony Express was not financially successful, and it closed after only 18 months. But man, did it have a history. Don't we all know that? The hunger for mail, however, did not close. The telegraph took over for urgent matters, long-distance urgent matters, and that evolved itself and kept evolving. But the mail moved to wagons for delivery, wagons that covered other stuff, that held other stuff. 1870. This is what the wagon looked like, U.S. mail. That morphed to a specialized, dedicated vehicle, what you see here, that did only mail delivery. And a few beats later, this newly conceived, legitimate, official mail service decided that it needed to designate specific mail delivery routes based on requirements, based on a criteria that would ensure dependable delivery. There are 3 requirements: that the carriers, the buggies, could not end up using the same road twice. So there was no going back and forth. The second criterion was that each route had to reach up to at least 100 families. Otherwise, why bother? And the third was, let's see if we can get these to show for you. There's Grants Pass. Sorry about that. I got a little bit too focused on this very interesting chapter of our country's history. There we are. End up using the same road twice. Please don't do that. Reach at least 100 families. And the third was that the road would be passable throughout the year. And in Grants Pass, for one, gets completely snowed over. I was in there. I went across Grants Pass one December in my Toyota with great brakes, warm seats, good music. It was horrendous. It was life-threatening. And it's hard to imagine that there could possibly have been wagons going up and down those roads, not the same road twice, servicing 100 families throughout the year. Very, very impressive. And of course, this is where our wonderful Postal Service became our heroes, where they said, neither rain nor snow nor sleet nor hail shall keep the postmen from their appointed rounds. The mail must go on. Just so inspiring. I don't know how they did it. Sturdy stuff. A handful of years later, in 1915, we're going to take a little peek, the buggy had evolved into a proper wagon with postmen in suits, one to give out the mail, another to drive the wagon. And people would go out to the wagon and pick up their mail. So it was neighborhood delivery. And here's a whole crowd of people, 10 people deep in Wisconsin. This is the highlight of every day, to go out and get your mail. Something exciting is happening. The United States is communicating with itself, getting and keeping the states connected. Wonderful. But the next thing that happened, the further progress that was about to be made, was astonishing, a true invention. The introduction of a shiny new gadget that you and I take completely for granted. We don't even notice it anymore. But in 1915, it was a breakthrough. And you know what it was? It was getting a mailbox. Save time, get a mailbox. Make it easier for us to deliver the mail. Get a mailbox. And the mailbox evolved. The ones you see on the screen on the lower right are from the 1940s, but it's in the Dust Bowl of Kansas, so they're still a little bit crummy, and they continue to evolve until they're very, very pretty. And that's it. That's what I wanted to introduce to you, this idea that these cross-country flights and then much more ambitious flights had their beginning with a very homely and homey and person-based necessity of connecting, of getting the mail to and from me and you. It was time for the country to reach out to itself. And now it's time for us to reach out to Dr. Phil Hayden, sharing his insights on the pilot's best friend, Visuality. Welcome, Phil.
Flying is the most visual of any activity that anyone can perform, with an exception of skiing downhill through a dense forest at top speed. And right below that is an airplane. Now, I want you to look at the airplane and think about what that image is telling you, because it is very important. And on the right, that's me sitting in the back of an airplane like that. Same model, except that it was a two-seater. That airplane is a P-51 Mustang, which is probably the finest fighter aircraft ever built by man. And it became a dominant force during World War II. Now, I want you to look at the tail, and the tail is red. Now, I think everybody, if you've lived in the United States, probably have heard of the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen were an experimental squadron that was put together after the World War II started. And they learned how to fly, and they become very proficient. And halfway through the war in 43, the military commanders in Europe asked if the Tuskegee Airmen could be transferred over to Europe to accompany the bombers into Germany, because for every 100 bombers that were flying they were the 8th Air Force, that were flying from England into Germany, 8 to 10 of them, they would lose them every time. The fighters they had were not capable of defending. They called them the heavies. So the Tuskegee Airmen took over that task. Now, the first time they showed up with the bombers, a lot of the pilots looked over there and said, well, these guys are black. I mean, they're going to run at the first sight of trouble. Well, they didn't. And they protected the bombers all the way to Berlin. This airplane, this Mustang, also, they started using it in 1943. And the advantage of the Mustang was it would go high, go fast, and it would dive like hell. I mean, this is what you need in a dogfight. Now, if you're ever interested in the Tuskegee Airmen, there's actually a stretch of 75 in Kentucky that's called Tuskegee Airmen Roadway. And the red tail that they painted did several things. And this is the most visual system I can ever think of. Number one is that when they got into a dogfight and a red tail showed up, what that means is don't shoot me, I'm one of you. The red tail also gave the bomber pilots a lot of confidence that they would be protected all the way to Berlin. And this red tail struck danger in the hearts of the German pilots because they had a very superior kill ratio than any fighter that the Air Force had ever had. Now, there's some really interesting movies out about the red tails. So if you're interested in the Tuskegee Airmen, you can do that. This airplane is the advanced trainer for the US Air Force. It is a T-38. It'll climb to 40,000 in about a minute and a half. It goes 1.6 times the speed of sound. And it's very much like a real fighter. Now, flying any type of aircraft requires what we call a cross-check. The cross-check means that you glance at the critical sources of information, both in and outside of the cockpit, at a rapid rate. You have to learn where that information is. You have to learn what that information tells you. And you have to incorporate that information into movements of a stick or a throttle or turn or go up. I mean, it's going to tell you all the information you need to fly that airplane. Now, as a follow-on to Gwen, in the 1920s, when the earliest U.S. air mail carriers flew, they would navigate at night with the aid of bonfires strategically placed on the ground. And these bonfire arrows were used in conjunction with pilotage and dead reckoning. Pilotage and dead reckoning is basically all you have in the cockpit is an airspeed indicator. You have a compass of some sort, which we'll show you later, and you have a timer or a clock. And so before you start out, you draw a line on a map or a chart. You measure what the direction of it is, what the heading is, and you measure how far it is to your first checkpoint or to your destination. So when you do dead reckoning, you fly a heading, you fly an airspeed, and you fly an altitude. And after so long a time, you look up and hopefully you see the runway. Now, and you also, hopefully, if the weather's good, you can check some landmarks along the way, like lakes, rivers, towns, water towers. That's exactly what dead reckoning is. Now, Gwen found this. I don't know where she found this, but this is really interesting. This is the, plot of the bonfire navigators from the East Coast to the West Coast. Now that's 2,000 miles. And these early airplanes were probably only going about 80 to 100 miles an hour. So you could take, it may take a couple, 3 days to make it all the way through. But this was really an interesting, slide for me. Charles Lindberg is one of the most important aviators in the history of aviation. In the 1930s, he started a program to paint the names of small Midwestern towns on the roof of buildings. And why this is significant to me is that I grew up in a small community in Kansas, in Cedric, just north of Wichita, and we had a hardware store. And a representative of Charles Lindberg came around and they wanted to paint the name of our town on the top of our hardware store. And I actually have a piece of paper at home that I'm protecting that was signed by Charles Lindberg, thanking us for allowing the operation of painting on the top of the building. Now, pilots also at that time used to follow highways, railroads, major landmarks, and everything like that. Now, at the bottom left, Charles Lindberg got an idea one time that he wanted to fly from New York to Paris. And there was a big prize for the first person who could fly all that way without landing. And so Charles Lindberg, he flew the Spirit of St. Louis from New York to Paris, which was 3,600 miles, on May the 20th, 21st, 1927. And he landed to the cheers of 100 Parisians. And he did this all by dead reckoning. Now, one thing he did that was incorporated, he was the first one to ever do this, is that when you are flying from New York to Paris or London or Europe, you are flying a great circle route. Now, you say, well, if I fly this heading, say I want to fly 090, which is east. If I fly east, I'll go around the equator or I'll go around this way. That's actually longer. And if you take a string and put it on a globe and, find out the shortest distance, it's called the Great Circle Route, which means it's a circle, half of a circle from New York to Paris. I want to go over the flight instruments and the navigation system. This is a cockpit of a small private aircraft. Now, I think it is a Cessna. It could be a Piper. I've never flown this airplane, but the point is that this gives a visual display of most of the information that a pilot needs to fly the airplane. At the top row there, that is your engine instruments. There in the middle is an attitude indicator. On the right is the altimeter, and on the left is the airspeed. And as you go down, there is navigation, and there is heading, the course that you want to take. This shows you the different information, the different gauges that give you information about the status of your airplane. Now, we can't forget that you got to look outside, because the pilot is absolutely responsible for not running into another airplane or running into a tower or running into a 20-story building. So in addition to cross-checking all of these information that's displayed here and the levers and switches and everything, you have to, keep your head on a swivel, which we used to say, left, right, front. That's what we learned in pilot training. But I'm going to show the next the four slides here that show the older version, like the World War II version of these instruments, and the current version. And the turn coordinator, that used to be one of the only instruments they had. That was one of the first instruments they ever constructed and put in an airplane. Then there is an airspeed indicator. Now look at the right one. The airspeed indicator has green, has very bright colors, and the early instruments used to be yellow numbers, yellow figures, and then finally they decided they would make them white on black, which is very visible and to the cockpit. So the yellow is danger, and the red is don't get past that, your airplane could come apart. The bottom one is heading, shows you the course that you're on, and on the left-hand side, that's a really old, I've never seen one of those. There's the rated descent, the altimeter. I put in the whiskey compass. That was the one, that was the original compass, was called a whiskey compass. And it was supposed to have whiskey in it because the whiskey had the right density to float that compass. Below is the navigation, the early navigation, VOR stations and radio beacons. They were located all over the US, and that was used back in the 50s and 60s, that gauge. Later on, it became more sophisticated, more electronic. There are the radios. Now, this is an important slide in that the white slide is called a transponder. Now, a transponder takes a radar signal from the ground, encodes it, and sends it back. And this was developed during World War II, and it's called IFF, Identification Friend or Foe. And it presents a special image on a radar screen so the radar operator knows exactly who he's talking to. And today it's all very electronic. It has your tail number, it has your destination, it has your altitude, all kinds of things. Up the top one is the transponder or the VHF signals. 122.8 is for visual flight rules, which I'll tell you in just a minute. And when you're on visual flight rules, nobody's really worried about you from the ground. They're not, they are worried that somebody's going to run into you or you're going to run into someone else, but they don't really follow you very closely. 121.5 is an emergency. Anytime that you get into emergency, you switch over to 121.5. The squawk down there, the 1200, if you put in 7500, it means I'm being hijacked. So if the pilot is, doesn't have to call to say I'm getting hijacked, all he has to do is change the 1200 to 7500. This is a modern integrated display. It's obviously on a computer screen. It has just about everything you need to know to fly the airplane. So you just have to learn how the information is being presented and how to control it. And most of all of if you look in the cockpit of the Boeing 737, it's all screened. I mean, just about every bit of the information you need is on a computer screen. This is a heads-up display. This is a simulator. I don't think this is a real flight, but it shows you all the information that's on a heads-up display, and that's all the information you need to land. And you are heading on a glide slope to land at that runway in front of you. Now, the automobile industry has taken over the visual display, properties. We have a 2-year-old Avion, a Toyota, and it has a visual display, and it displays just about most of the information you need to operate a car. This is really all I want you to look at. This is our top fighter. This is the F-35. It is probably one of the top fighters in the world. Now, this is a little more complicated because that screen that you're looking at, it has flight instruments, engine instruments, and nav instruments, but it also has armament instruments. It tells you the status of your missiles, your bombs, and things like that. Plus, it has a radar. Now they can look over the horizon and see enemy coming 30, 40 miles away. This is what's called a VFR slide. VFR means visual flight rules. And if you have 3 miles of visibility or more, you can fly VFR. You just get in the airplane and go. You don't have to file a flight map or anything. Down below is a chart that is used for VFR flying. Now, you can go anywhere you want to, but you can't go into the circles. Those are control zones. This happens to be North Carolina. That's Raleigh right in the front of you, Durham's to the left, Winston-Salem's to the left. And I want you to look at the blue lines. The blue lines are instrument highways in the sky. That's when you're going to be talking to the air route control and the departure control and the approach control. This is instrument. You can see the upright. That's probably a half a mile visibility. And it's probably, I don't know, a couple 100 feet ceiling. So if you are flying in this fog and you're getting ready to land, about a 1/4 mile from the runway, you'll break out and you'll have limited visibility, but you'll see enough to land because the runway is lit up with lights. You've been flying in the soup, in the clouds for 2 or 3 hours, and you're starting to let down, and you break out, and especially if it's at night, and you see this beautiful picture in front of you, that's the runway. You can see there's the approach lights, don't land here. The thick rectangles, that's the start of the runway. That's the threshold where you can land. And they want you to land in the next maybe 100 yards, 200 yards. If you're going to stop on that runway, you got to do that. On the right-hand side, you can see the one on the left doesn't have the number, but 27 means that is runway 27, and it means it's a heading of 270. And I want you to see that there are taxiways approaching that connect with the runway where airplanes, depart the runway and enter the runway with those. You can see a white line or that yellow line, and there's a whole manual by the FAA that depicts the rules and regulations of how you present a runway and all of the taxiways. There are certain signs so that pilots are used to looking at the same picture. There are lights on airplanes. There are red lights, there are green lights, just like on a boat. I don't know if you navigate or if you have a boat, and if you take a boat out at night, you got to turn the running lights on. And that's white, green, and red. And this is on the starboard side is green, the port side is red, and white is behind. So if you're coming up behind an airplane, you're going to see white lights. These are T-38s, and the T-38 is used in the advanced pilot training. Students go through 6 months of a T-37 or another type of airplane, and they fly the T-38 in advance. And one of the things they learn is formation. Now, if you are the wingman, and the wingman is the one on the outside, all you do is stare at the pilot. Never lose sight of the pilot. You don't look in the cockpit, you don't look around, you're concentrating 100%. These airplanes are probably going 450 to 500 miles an hour. And if you hiccup, you may be running into the other airplane. So this is very, very precise flying. It's always fun to take a student up with you because you're worried about the student. And when they join up, they come roaring in to join up with you. You hope that they have the airplane under control so that if they come in too fast, you just pop up and let them go underneath you. The ceiling of this airplane is 55,000, and this is probably 1.1 Mach useful speed. Flying, based on my understanding, is all visual. When you get around an airport, when you get above a certain altitude, there are thousands of airplanes in the sky at once. And if you ever look at them on the East Coast, going in and out of New York, Chicago, I mean, there are certain rules to the road, and you have to follow the rules because everybody expects you to be at a certain place at a certain time, and you better be there because that's the way they control traffic. I'd like to thank you very much for entering my world. I've been a pilot since 1958. I went through ROTC at Wichita State University, and then I went through training, and then I owned a twin Cessna and a Piper Arrow. And there's nothing more satisfying than getting up to 10,000 feet and looking around. Thinking around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. So we ask ourselves, if that's what they do in the airline industry, airplanes, why not also at work? Why not also at work? That kind of visuality, that kind of vibrancy. Visuality has been a part of our lives, increasingly so, since the Industrial Revolution, since things became complex. So we want to encourage you to pursue visuality in your workplace,